The Tale of Two Trees. There is a story that is etched into the very bedrock of our civilization, a myth so foundational that it has shaped our understanding of God, of humanity, and of the very nature of sin and salvation for millennia. It is a story that begins in a garden, a perfect paradise, a world without suffering, without time, without death. In this garden live the first man and woman, Adam and Eve, depicted as innocent, childlike beings, living in a state of blissful, unquestioning obedience to their Creator, a benevolent and all-powerful God who walks with them in the cool of the day. This is the story of Genesis, the familiar and sacred narrative of our origins. At the very center of this paradise, we are told, stood two mysterious and potent trees, the tree of life, which bestowed immortality, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The Creator gives his children one single prohibition: they may eat from any tree in the garden, including the tree of life, but they must not eat from the tree of knowledge, for on the day that they eat of it, they shall surely die. We know the rest of the story. A serpent, a subtle and cunning tempter, appears. He questions God's command. He promises Eve that the fruit will not bring death, but will make her like God, knowing good and evil. She eats. She shares the fruit with Adam, and in that single act of disobedience, their eyes are opened. Paradise is lost. Sin and death enter the world, and humanity begins its long, tragic exile from the presence of God. This is the story of the fall, the orthodox interpretation that has defined our understanding of our own flawed and fallen nature. But what if this interpretation, this entire narrative of a loving God, a disobedient humanity, and a malevolent tempter, is a deliberate and profound inversion of the truth? What if the story we have been told is a veil, a piece of exoteric propaganda designed to hide a much deeper, more challenging, and ultimately more empowering esoteric reality? What if the God of the garden was not the ultimate, true, and transcendent source of all being, but was a lesser, jealous, and ignorant being? The entity the Gnostics called the Demiurge, a cosmic architect who wished to keep his human creations in a state of ignorant, blissful slavery. What if the serpent was not a tempter from a hell below, but a liberator, an emissary from a higher, truer God, a benevolent being of light sent to awaken humanity from its drugged slumber within the Demiurge's counterfeit paradise? And what if the sin of eating from the tree of knowledge was not a fall from grace, but the first, necessary and heroic step towards true divine consciousness? What if it was not an act of disobedience, but an act of profound courage, the moment humanity chose the painful path of gnosis, of knowledge, over the easy path of ignorant bliss? This is not a modern rewriting of an ancient text. This is the secret, alternative interpretation of the Garden of Eden story that has been whispered for centuries in the hidden schools of Western mysticism, a truth that was preserved in the forbidden Gnostic Gospels and the cryptic commentaries of the Kabbalists. This is the story that was deemed so dangerous, so subversive to the foundations of institutional power, that its texts were ordered to be burned and its followers were condemned as heretics. This journey is an invitation to uncover that hidden truth. We will explore this ancient, esoteric interpretation of our most foundational myth. We will deconstruct the identity of the serpent, revealing the two faces of the being called Lucifer. We will re-examine the role of Eve, not as a naive victim, but as a wise and courageous priestess. And in the heart of our exploration, we will unveil the most profound secret of all, the Gnostic truth about the conception and birth of Cain, a truth that reveals the existence of two distinct and powerful bloodlines within the human race. This is not the story you were taught in Sunday school. This is the tale of our origins as a divine and rebellious species, a story of how a spark of forbidden serpent wisdom was injected into our very being, setting us on a long and difficult journey back to our true divine home. Part 2. The Two Faces of the Serpent. The nature of Lucifer. To begin our journey into this forbidden interpretation of Genesis, we must first have the courage to confront the most misunderstood and maligned figure in the entire story: the serpent. For most of us, the identity of this creature is a closed case. The serpent is Satan, the devil, Lucifer, the great adversary of God and the ultimate source of evil and temptation in the world. He is the cosmic villain, the father of lies, whose sole purpose in the garden was to deceive our innocent ancestors and to bring about their tragic fall from grace. This is the orthodox narrative, a story that has been used for 2 millennia to explain the origin of suffering and to cast a long, dark shadow of fear and suspicion over the very idea of forbidden knowledge. But what if that is the first and greatest lie? What if the true deception was not the one told by the serpent, but the one told about the serpent? The esoteric traditions, the Gnostics and the Kabbalists, invite us to perform a radical act of intellectual and spiritual courage. They ask us to set aside the monstrous caricature of Satan and to look instead at the original, archetypal identity of the being who spoke to Eve. They ask us to look at the name that was later given to the great rebel angel, Lucifer. The name itself is the first clue. In our modern world, it has become synonymous with evil, but its original Latin meaning is precise, and it is breathtaking. It comes from two words, lux, meaning light, and fere, meaning to bring or to carry. Lucifer is, by his very definition, the light bringer. He is the morning star, the brilliant planet Venus that appears in the sky just before the dawn, heralding the coming of the sun's illumination. How did this magnificent being of light become our ultimate symbol of darkness? The Gnostic texts provide a shocking and subversive answer. They suggest that Lucifer's reputation was a piece of cosmic propaganda, a lie told by a false god to discredit the very being who had come to expose him. To understand this, we must remember the Gnostic cosmology. The God who created the material world, the God of Genesis, was not the ultimate, true and transcendent God. He was the demiurge, a lesser, ignorant, and often tyrannical being who created a flawed, counterfeit cosmos and then, in his arrogance, declared himself the one and only God. This material world was his prison, and Adam and Eve were his blissful, ignorant slaves. In this context, Lucifer's famous rebellion is not a rebellion against the true ultimate source of all being. It is a heroic and necessary rebellion against the cosmic jailer, the ignorant tyrant who wished to keep consciousness trapped in a state of slumber. Lucifer, the light bringer, becomes a Promethean figure, a heroic rebel who defies the false god in order to bring the fire of consciousness, the gift of gnosis, to the sleeping human race. The serpent in the garden, then, is not an agent of a hell below, but an emissary of the true transcendent God above, sent on a secret mission to awaken the divine sparks of Adam and Eve and to remind them of their true luminous origin. This reframing of the serpent as a symbol of wisdom and liberation is not unique to the Gnostics. It is in fact a far more ancient and universal archetype than the later depiction of it as a figure of evil. All across the ancient world, the serpent was revered as a sacred and powerful being. In the yogic traditions of India, the Kundalini is a divine, feminine, serpentine energy that lies coiled and dormant at the base of the spine. The entire path of spiritual awakening is understood as the process of awakening this serpent, so that she may rise up the central channel of the spine, activating the chakras, and ultimately uniting with the divine consciousness at the crown of the head, bringing a state of ecstatic enlightenment. Here the serpent is not the tempter, it is the very engine of our own divinity. In ancient Greece, the symbol of medicine and healing was, and still is, the rod of Asclepius, which depicts a single serpent coiled around a staff. For the Greeks, the serpent's ability to shed its skin made it a powerful symbol of rebirth, of regeneration, of the cyclical power of life, death, and healing. In ancient Egypt and Greece, the Ouroboros, the image of a serpent eating its own tail, was a profound symbol of eternity, of wholeness, and of the great alchemical secret that the beginning and the end are one. Even in the Americas, the great god of the Aztecs and Toltecs, Quetzalcoatl, was the feathered serpent, a divine being associated with creation, with wisdom, and with the planet Venus, the morning star, the star of Lucifer. When we view the serpent of Genesis through this wider, more ancient and more universal lens, its identity is transformed. It is no longer the simple one-dimensional villain of the orthodox story. It becomes a complex, multivalent, and profoundly powerful archetype. It represents the subversive, illuminating, and often dangerous power of wisdom itself. It is the sacred force that shatters our comfortable illusions, that questions our blind obedience, and that invites us, with a whispered and irresistible promise, to taste the forbidden fruit of our own divine and self-aware consciousness. If this then was the true nature of the serpent, not a tempter but a teacher, not an agent of darkness but a bringer of light, we must now ask an even more profound question. What was the true nature of his sacred and secret conversation with Eve in the heart of the garden? If this exploration resonated with the part of you that knows there is more to reality than what we see, then our journey together has only just begun. Each week we delve into the profound mysteries of consciousness, from ancient wisdom to modern science, to help unlock the secrets of your own magnificent being. Subscribe and activate the bell to join a community of fellow navigators and seekers. Let's continue to explore the unseen together. Part 3. The Secret Conception, the union of Eve and the serpent. We have now arrived at the very heart of our mystery, the central pivotal event in the Garden of Eden, an act so profound that its true nature has been veiled in allegory and suppressed for millennia. We have re-examined the identity of the serpent, transforming him from a simple villain into a complex, luminous and subversive archetype, a bringer of the very gnosis that the God of the garden had forbidden. Now we must turn our gaze to the forbidden act itself, the eating of the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. The Orthodox story presents us with a simple, almost childlike narrative of temptation and transgression. A talking snake, an apple, a moment of weakness, a single disobedient bite that damns the entire human race. For centuries, this has been the literal interpretation, the foundation of the doctrine of original sin. But the ancient mystics, the Gnostics and the Kabbalists, knew that a story of this cosmic magnitude could never be about something so mundane. They understood that the sacred texts of our origins are not simple historical records. They are profound, multi-layered, alchemical formulas, written in the symbolic language of the soul. They knew that to understand the secret of the garden, you must look past the literal and into the metaphorical. In these ancient traditions, the act of eating often signifies something far more intimate than simple digestion. To eat is to take something into your very being, to assimilate it, to allow it to become a part of your own substance. And when the fruit you are eating comes from the tree of knowledge, the act of eating becomes a metaphor for the most intimate possible union with that knowledge. It is not a casual act of consumption. It is a profound act of communion, an alchemical process in which the knower and the known become one. Imagine the great art of alchemy. The alchemist's goal was to unite the opposites, the sun and the moon, the masculine and the feminine, the fiery, active principle of sulfur, and the cool, receptive principle of mercury, in a sacred marriage, a conjuncture within the sealed alchemical vessel. It was from this union of opposites that a third transcendent and miraculous thing was born, the philosopher's stone, the symbol of the integrated and enlightened self. The Gnostics saw the drama in the garden as just such an alchemical process. The serpent, the light bringer, is the active, fiery and fertilizing principle of gnosis. Eve, the archetypal first woman, is the receptive, fertile and foundational principle of the human soul. The eating of the fruit is the symbolic description of their sacred alchemical union within the sealed vessel of the garden. It is the moment the divine, illuminating wisdom of the serpent is taken into and united with the very substance of the human form. And as the alchemists knew, any such union must, by law, produce a child. This leads us to the great forbidden revelation, the secret of secrets that is hidden in the cryptic verses of the Gnostic Gospels and the mystical commentaries of the Kabbalistic Zohar. This is the truth that was deemed so dangerous, so shocking, that it had to be suppressed. The ancient wisdom teaches that the union between the serpent and Eve was not just metaphorical. It was a literal, physical, and sexual union, and the child that was conceived from this sacred and forbidden congress was not Abel, and was not Seth, it was Cain. The Zohar, the foundational text of Jewish mysticism, speaks of this with a veiled but unmistakable clarity. It identifies the serpent in the garden with the great archangel Samael, a complex and powerful figure whose name can mean both the venom of God and the splendor of God. He is a being of both immense light and profound darkness. The Zohar states that Samael, riding upon the serpent, came unto Eve and injected his filth into her, and from this union she conceived Cain. While the Orthodox mind recoils at the word filth, the Gnostic and the Kabbalist understand its deeper, alchemical meaning. It is the injection of a foreign, non-Adamic and spiritually potent substance into the human story. It is the seed of gnosis, the spark of divine, rebellious consciousness, the very essence of the Lightbringer himself, planted directly into the womb of humanity. Cain, therefore, is not the son of Adam. He is the son of the serpent. He is the child of Eve's union with a divine and otherworldly consciousness. This single radical reinterpretation shatters the entire foundation of the Orthodox narrative and reframes the whole of human history. In this new and more profound light, the figure of Eve herself is transformed. In the traditional story, she is a naive, weak-willed, and easily deceived creature, a secondary being who is the source of humanity's damnation. But in the Gnostic understanding, she becomes the central, most courageous, and most important hero of the entire drama. She is not a fool who was tricked. She is the human incarnation of Sophia, of wisdom itself. She is the one who, unlike the passive and childlike Adam, has the spiritual courage and the profound intuition to understand the serpent's message. She understands that the garden is a beautiful prison, that the god of the garden is a cosmic jailer, and that the serpent is offering the one and only key to liberation. Her choice to unite with the serpent is not a sin. It is a sacred and heroic act of rebellion against the tyranny of the demiurge. She willingly and consciously chooses to receive the seed of gnosis, the light of self-awareness, knowing that it will bring pain, suffering, and exile, but also knowing that it is the only way for humanity to begin the long, difficult, and ultimately glorious journey of awakening. She is not the mother of our sin. She is the mother of our consciousness. She is the great and wise priestess who, in a single brave act, stole the fire from a false god and gave it to her children so that we might one day learn to become gods ourselves. This, the Gnostics teach, is the true and hidden story of the Great Conception, the secret of how the divine, questioning and serpent-like spark of gnosis was first planted on this earth. Legacy of Cain and Abel. The secret and sacred union between the wisdom of the serpent and the receptivity of Eve was not just a footnote in the story of creation, it was the pivotal event that forever altered the destiny of the human race. The birth of Cain, the firstborn, was not merely the birth of a man, it was the birth of a new kind of consciousness on earth. It was the successful injection of a divine, Gnostic, and otherworldly seed into the Adamic clay of humanity. The story that follows, the familiar and tragic tale of the two brothers, Cain and Abel, must now be seen in this new and more profound light. This is not a simple story of sibling rivalry or jealousy over a sacrificed offering. It is a grand archetypal allegory for the two great spiritual lineages, the two opposing paths of the soul that have been at war within humanity and within each of us, ever since that fateful conception in the garden. First, let us consider the lineage of Abel. He is the second born, but he is the first pure son of Adam and Eve. He carries the unadulterated bloodline of the Adamic race, the humanity that was fashioned by the demiurge, the god of this material world. In the biblical text, Abel is a shepherd, a keeper of sheep. This is his archetypal signature. He represents a state of consciousness that is in simple pastoral harmony with the natural world as it was created. He is a figure of innocence, of simplicity, and of unquestioning faith, or pistis. His is the path of the earthly man, the soul that is content to live in the world as it is given. The lineage of Abel represents those who are the keepers of tradition, the followers of the established law, the ones who find their meaning and their solace in simple, heartfelt faith and in obedience to the God of this world. There is a profound and gentle beauty to this path. It is a life lived in harmony with the cycles of nature, a life of community, of tradition, of a deep and abiding trust in a higher power. It is the path of the soul that is content to be a sheep in the flock of the great shepherd, to be cared for, to be protected, and to be guided. From the Gnostic perspective, however, this beautiful innocence is also a state of profound spiritual slumber. It is the path of the soul that does not question its prison, however beautiful that prison may be. It is the consciousness of the contented citizen of the demiurge's counterfeit cosmos, a soul that has not yet been stirred by the divine homesickness for its true forgotten home in the pleroma. This is the Adamic bloodline, the legacy of Abel, the path of the faithful heart. But then there is Cain, firstborn, the son of Eve and the serpent, the light bringer. He carries a different fire, a different blood. He is the progenitor of the Luciferic or serpent bloodline. His archetypal signature is not one of pastoral contentment. He is a tiller of the soil, and more importantly, after his exile, he becomes the builder of cities. Cain is a figure of action, of creation, of a profound and divine discontent. He carries within his very essence the Gnostic spark of his father, the fiery, questioning and creative energy of Lucifer himself. His is the path of the divine rebel, the path of the awakened spark that knows on a deep cellular level that this material world is not its true home. This lineage of Cain is the bloodline of the Gnostics, the alchemists, the mystics, the great artists, the revolutionary scientists, and the radical philosophers. It is the lineage of all who are driven by a restless inner fire, to question reality, to challenge the authority of the demiurge and his worldly institutions, and to create new things. The children of Cain are those who are never, and can never be content with the world as it is, because their soul, burning with the light of gnosis, dimly remembers the perfection of the pleroma. Their entire life is a creative expression of this divine homesickness. They build great cities, they compose heartbreaking symphonies, they write revolutionary books, they pursue scientific knowledge to its furthest and most terrifying frontiers, all in a desperate and often unconscious attempt to either recreate a shadow of their lost divine paradise here on earth, or to find a way to build a ladder back to it. They are the wolves and the eagles, the creatures that can never be domesticated by the great shepherd of the demiurge. This is the Luciferic bloodline, the legacy of Cain, the path of the Gnostic mind. With this understanding, the story of the first murder is transformed from a simple crime of passion into a profound and tragic archetypal conflict. The story tells us that God, the demiurge, rejected Cain's offering, the fruits of his own creative labor, while accepting Abel's offering, the simple passive sacrifice of a lamb from his flock. This is the eternal conflict between the Gnostic and the Orthodox paths. The God of this world does not desire the creative, questioning fruits of your own gnosis. He desires the simple, obedient faith of his flock. Cain's rage, then, is the rage of the Creator, whose soul's offering is rejected, the fury of the awakened consciousness that is condemned by a God who prefers his children to remain asleep. The murder of Abel by Cain is the inevitable, archetypal collision of these two opposing states of being. It is the active, questioning, creative, and discontented principle of gnosis, Cain clashing with and ultimately destroying the passive, innocent, unquestioning, and contented principle of simple faith, pistis Abel. It is the story of how the introduction of self-aware, divine consciousness into the world inevitably shatters the simple, childlike innocence that came before it. The awakening consciousness of Cain, with all its divine discontent and its creative fire, cannot peacefully coexist with the sleeping consciousness of Abel. The tragic truth is that the moment you begin to truly question, the moment you begin to create your own meaning, the simple pastoral paradise of your old beliefs is slain. This is the great and sorrowful sacrifice that must be made at the altar of our own awakening. This, the Gnostics teach, is the story of the two great paths that exist within humanity and perhaps within the heart of every single one of us. There is the path of the faithful shepherd, the child of Adam, who lives in harmony with the world as it is given. And there is the path of the rebellious creator, the child of the serpent, who is forever driven to transform the world into what it could be. Part 5. The Serpent's Gift. We have journeyed together through the looking glass, into a strange, subversive, and magnificent reimagining of our most foundational story. We have taken the familiar tale of the Garden of Eden and turned its jewel to the light, revealing a hidden, esoteric facet that changes the meaning of everything. We have seen a world where the garden was a beautiful prison, and its god a flawed and jealous jailer. We have met the serpent not as a tempter but as Lucifer, the courageous light bringer, an emissary from a truer, more distant and more loving God. We have witnessed the courage of Eve, not as a naive sinner, but as a wise priestess, the great mother of our conscious awakening. And we have uncovered the most profound secret of all, that the birth of Cain was not the first stain on humanity, but was the deliberate and sacred injection of a divine, questioning, and creative fire into the human bloodline. With this new and challenging map laid out before us, we must now return to the very beginning, to the concept that has for so long been the source of our collective guilt and shame. We must return to the idea of the original sin. The Orthodox story tells us that this was our great curse, the tragic misstep that damned us to a life of suffering, toil, and spiritual exile. But the Gnostic tradition, in its radical and life-altering wisdom, invites us to see it in an entirely new light. It invites us to see that the event in the garden was not a curse at all. It was, in fact, the greatest and most necessary gift that humanity ever received. It was the serpent's gift. What was this gift? It was not the gift of sin and death. It was the gift of self-awareness. To eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was to awaken from the blissful, unconscious, animal innocence of the Adamic state. It was the birth of the ego, the birth of duality, the moment that consciousness was able to look at itself and say, I am. This was a painful birth, as all true births are. It cast us out of the womb-like safety of the garden and into the harsh realities of a world of opposites, of light and dark, of pleasure and pain, of life and death. But it was in that very exile that our journey to becoming truly human, and ultimately truly divine, could finally begin. The second part of the serpent's gift was a divine and unquenchable discontent. The soul of Abel, the child of Adam, is a soul of contentment. It is at peace with the world as it is given. But the soul of Cain, the child of the serpent, is a soul of fire. It is forever restless, forever striving, forever driven by a divine dissatisfaction. It is this Luciferic fire that has been the engine of all human progress, of all of our greatest art, of all of our most profound science and philosophy. It is the refusal to accept reality as it is, and the burning, creative, and often painful desire to transform it into what it could be. It is the artist who sees a blank canvas and is compelled to fill it with a vision of a more beautiful world. It is the scientist who looks at the heavens and is compelled to understand the laws of their motion. It is the mystic who looks at their own limited self and is compelled to seek the infinite within. This divine discontent is not a flaw. It is the very signature of our divine parentage. And finally, the serpent's greatest gift was the awakening of our innate quest for gnosis. By revealing that the God of the garden was not the true God, the serpent planted in us a seed of sacred rebellion, the understanding that we must always question the reality that is presented to us. He gave us the key to our own liberation, the knowledge that our true home is not in this flawed material world, but in a higher, more perfect realm of light, and that the path back to that home is not through blind faith in an external authority, but through the direct, personal, and courageous exploration of our own inner consciousness. This, then, is the final, transformational call of this forbidden story. It is an invitation for you to look within your own heart, to feel the nature of your own soul, and to recognize your spiritual lineage. Do you feel the call of the Adamic bloodline, the quiet, pastoral path of the faithful shepherd, a path of deep and humble devotion to the world as it is? Or do you feel in your own being the restless, unquenchable, and creative fire of the serpent's blood? Do you feel the divine discontent of Cain, the burning drive to question, to create, to build, and to challenge the very limits of your own reality? To be a child of Cain, to be a carrier of the Luciferic spark, is to accept a difficult and often lonely path. It is the path of the mystic, the artist, the rebel, but it is also the path of the conscious creator, the one who dares to embrace the serpent's gift, to take full responsibility for their own awakening, and to seek with a courageous and unwavering heart the forbidden fruit of their own divine and self-aware consciousness.